Reverend Morgan for that wonderful prayer. And thanks to Belize History Association, young but growing strong, and for presenting and making this a part of our September celebrations. We now call on the chair of the Belize History Association, Dr. Abigail Mackey, to give us our welcome remarks. Dr. Mackey.
Good morning. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, the National Assembly, the clergy, panelists, fellow citizens, colleagues, students, and friends of Belize here in the room, and those listening via radio. Welcome all. It is truly a great pleasure for me to be with you this morning as we listen to the preliminary translation of some Spanish reports that will add to the story that is the history of our beloved Belize, even as it was being formed, becoming, as the words of our 2016 celebration theme indicate, sovereign and strong, together as one. I thank the organizers, panelists, and yourselves, the participants, for this opportunity to share some remarks on behalf of the Belize History Association. So let me do just that. In early December 2013, the Institute of Social and Cultural Research put out a call to all interested persons to participate in an information session for the establishment of a National Commission on Belize's History. This event occurred at the George Price Center in Belmopan on Tuesday, December 17th. By January 25th, 2014, the Belize History Association was officially formed as a nonprofit organization with the Institute for Social and Cultural Research as its secretariat. Legally registered, the association's primary purpose is to foster greater awareness and understanding of the history of Belize, documenting the depth and breadth of our collective stories so that future generations will be informed of their connections to this land and people we know and love as ours. As the chief cheerleader for documentation of our history, I take this opportunity to remind each and every one of you that you are a part of the story today that will become the history of your children and grandchildren. Just as the stories of your parents and grandparents and all those who came before us contributed to the history we now pour over, as in the case of the panel presentation today. Our hope in the Belize History Association is to make visible the tapestry that is our contributions to the development of this nation called Belize. We continue to help in shaping where we are going in our future. As a part of the Belize story, I urge you to become an active member of the association. You already are a member just by being Belizean, by being a friend of Belize, by living in Belize, by being concerned about and wanting to share or know more about. You're already a member. So we urge you to become an active member. And in that regard, I want to put two plugs in at this moment. One is that the first issue of our newsletter is coming out later this month. So check it out. You see our banner here, all our information is right here, so you can copy it, our webpage or Facebook. The other plug is an invitation to join us at the next general membership meeting of the Belize History Association, scheduled for Saturday, December 3rd, 2016. We only have 2 general meetings per year. The first one for this year was in July, so I urge you all to join us. For more information, check out our website. Check us out on Facebook. I thank you kindly for allowing me to make these remarks. I welcome you to today's event. Enjoy the story of the Battle of 1798 as recorded by the Spaniards and translated and presented by the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McKay, for those welcome remarks. I want to thank the media for their participation along with the Belize History Association, and we also want to acknowledge the presence of members of the diplomatic corps who are here with us today. The radio listeners, I want to put it out there that you can put questions to the panel via the internet. And if the questions are not posed here in this discussion today, there will be a response coming to you via email. We also I just want to outline what will occur right now. I'm going to call the panelists to the stage. Then we're going to have a panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we're going to have a question and answer segment. And we will take questions from the floor. So you can make note of questions that you have, and we can pose them at the end of the panel discussion. So first, I'm going to call Dr. Herman Bird on stage. And Dr. Herman Bird comes from the Belize Archives and Record Service. Secondly, I want to welcome Mr. Giovanni Pinello on stage. Mr. Giovanni comes from the Institute for Social and Cultural Research under the big umbrella niche. I then want to welcome Dr. Angel Cal, who is currently at the University of Belize, representing the University of Belize. Our fourth panelist comes from our neighboring country, one of our good friends from Mexico. And so we call Dr. Juan Castillo from la Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. And we also called from Mexico, Dr. Martin Ramos from the Universidad de Quintana Roo. And finally, we call Maestro Eduardo Paul from, again, the Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. Please give all our distinguished panels a warm welcome and round of applause. So now we move to the panelists.
Good morning and welcome. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning again and welcome. As you know, this month we are celebrating the 218th anniversary of the victory of the Baymen and their slaves at the Battle of St. George's Caye. The research effort that has produced this presentation here this morning was aimed at discovering how the Spanish accounted for their activities before, during, and after the 1798 battle. For me, the most exciting aspect of this effort is that it provides a first ever opportunity to see the battle through the eyes of the Spanish officials. When we have completed our work in the next 2 years, we will have, perhaps for the very first time, two sets of accounts, the Spanish on the one hand and the British on the other. And we will have a very comprehensive picture of this significant event in our history. What I'd like to do in the next few moments is to quickly give you some sense of how this project began, who were the individuals who participated, what we tried to accomplish, where we are now, and what we hope to do in the future. In the 1990s, a Spanish archaeologist by the name of Juan Luis Bonor, who had been working in Belize, donated a set of photocopies of Spanish archival records to the Belize Archives and Records Service, and they remained there for a very long time. I was shown these records in 2010, and 2 years later, I had a discussion with a colleague of mine, the historian Dr. Angel Caye, who is with us here today, about how we could make these documents, given their significance, more accessible and available to Belizeans. Dr. Caye sought help from his colleagues at the La Universidad de Quintana Roo in Chetumal, who had skills in interpreting 18th century Spanish documents. And I'm very grateful that they willingly agreed to participate in this activity. Our first meeting was held on the 23rd of June in 2014 at the University of Quintana Roo in Chetumal. At that meeting, Dr. Caye, Dr. Martin Ramos, who's here, Ms. Marielle Pucci, and myself from the Belize Archives came up with a plan to transcribe these some 1,200 pages of archival records from 18th century Spanish to modern Spanish. Our aim was very simple. We recognized that for the most part, the major accounts that we have had of this battle, of this significant event in our history, have come from the hands of the Baymen. What we wanted to do, we wanted to find out what were some of the views of the Spanish officials who were involved in this. And we had a lot of questions, as you would expect, going into this. What account did the Spaniards give of themselves of the battle? How did they explain their defeat or their retreat? How was the invasion planned? What do the Spanish accounts tell us of the role of the slaves in Belize and in Bacalar? Interestingly also, we wanted to find out if the Spanish accounts differed in any way from the British accounts. Do the Spanish accounts confirm what we know from the British accounts? So these and many more questions sort of impelled us to tackle this project of transcribing this rich source of material that had been donated to the archives. In terms of how the project was carried out, 3 institutions played a very important role from the onset, and that is, of course, we at the Belize Archives who had the documents, the La Universidad Intercultural Maya in Morelos, where Dr. Caye was working at the time, and the University of Quintana Roo in Chetumal. Later on, as the project developed in 2014, we invited NICH and the Institute for Social and Cultural Research to join the project, and we also extended an invitation to the Department of History at the University of Belize. So together, these were the principal partners who came together to carry out this work. In terms of how it was done, the transcription of the documents, we divided the documents into sets of about 350 pages, and this was distributed among 4 teams from these institutions. One of the first things that we had to do is we had to train the participants in this very arcane science of paleography, which is the science of interpreting and reading ancient writings. Fortunately, we had one of the participants, Dr. Gustavo Alfaro, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here this morning, who is a paleographer. And so we had an early session in February of 2015 in Belmopan at the George Price Center for about 20 or so participants to give us the kind of skills we needed to tackle this task of working with these 18th century Spanish documents. I want to say that in addition to the individuals from the University of Quintana Roo, we also had Drs. Castillo, Cocum, and Mr. Eduardo Montalvo from UMCRO, that is the La Universidad Intercultural Maya in Morelos. I was, and I remain especially delighted that we were able to attract quite a number of young people like yourselves to participate in this project. And our aim there was to try to introduce them to the challenge and to the excitement of studying history, both Belizean and Mexican. After all, as you can see up here, this group is working post-retirement. So we need some young blood like yourself to be part of this process of sharing this rich history. So especially delighted that we had so many young people. And we have, for a moment, we're just going to show you some of the photos of our meetings that were held over the past 2 years. Somebody turn up the light. Thank you. So in a nutshell, what have we accomplished to date? I think we have accomplished a gigantic task, and that is we have completed the transcription of these 1,200 pages. And as you'll see in a moment, we have been able to kind of reconstruct a timeline of the battle from the point of view of the Spanish officials who were involved in it. And I think that's a tremendous accomplishment, and that was the focus of our work over the next 2 years. In terms of where we go from here, we still have about 2 years of work ahead of us, so we can't relax yet. We will be reviewing the work that has been done, and we will be tackling the next task of translating the documents from modern Spanish into English. We eventually want to put out a publication, a bilingual publication of both sets of the documents, both in English and in Spanish. So that's the work that's ahead of us in the next 2 years. As I conclude my brief intro to our undertaking here, one of the things I really want to emphasize is that this was, from the point of view of all of the participants, this was a completely voluntary undertaking. So they all undertook this on top of the already heavy commitments, completely voluntary. It was really a labor of love, really enthused by given the significance of what we were undertaking and its potential for deepening our understanding of our history and also of the history of Quintana Roo. I'd like to thank, though, the Belize Archives Department, the CONACYT, which is the Mexican National Council for Science and Technology, and also for NICH, which provided financial support for the accommodations and the many meetings that we had over the past 2 years. Above all, I would like to thank all of the members of the teams in Belize and Quintana Roo, again, as I said, who took this on, were so generous in their time. I would like to thank, in particular, Dr. Angel Cal, who took over the job of coordinating the project, and I think did a wonderful job of doing that. Also, I'd like to thank 2 of the real anchors. One of them is here with us today, Professor Martin Ramos from Quintana Roo. Unfortunately, Dr. Alfaro couldn't be here, but I'd like to ask Dr. Martin to kindly convey our appreciation to him, because he has really been an anchor of the project, being both a historian of Mexico and also a paleographer himself. You saw him in the photos in some of the sessions that we had. So with that, I think this is sort of an appetizer. I think I can turn it over to the folks to do the main course now. Thank you all very much.
Good morning, everyone. Giovanni Pinello from the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, the research arm of the National Institute of Culture and History. And protocol has been established. Good morning once again. I hope that my presentation this morning will shed some light into the setting, that it will also serve to unite us more in understanding who we are as a nation, how far we have come, what our peoples went through, and that it will also continue to bring others to the table, to do more research, and to have these collaborative efforts that are carried out through the various institutions, particularly the regional institutions, because this is part of our story. I want to join Dr. Bird in thanking members of the panel and their respective teams, and I in particular want to mention members of the ISCR niche team, which included some of the students at the University of Belize at the time, and a student from St. John's Junior College. I want to call out the names because I think that it is right and proper. They are young people like many of you students, and they're examples of the work that you can undertake in such collaborative efforts. They may not be here, but I want to thank people like Kendra Griffith, Kelsey Sanker, Claudia Garcia, who was the student from St. John's Junior College, and my daughter Carla Pinello, who was a student of UB and also engaged in this paleographic work. They're very young people, and I guess the work that they have done with us, the efforts of what we have learned will surely pay off in at least them getting that knowledge and sharing it with you. A lot of what is presented here today is work that was done by these young people in Belize in conjunction with the young people from UIMCRO and UCRO, as Dr. Bird rightly mentioned. So enough of that for me. Rolly? My task is rather easy, and I have to do the setting. Besides looking at the paleographic work that was before us, I went to do a little bit more of the research of the area. And so what we focus on are the southern section of what is today the Yucatan Peninsula, what is the state of Quintana Roo, and the northern section of Belize. It is within this geographic setting, then, that we have to understand what was going on after 1786, after that signing of the Convention of London, which declared the boundaries to be the Rio Hondo and as far south as the Sibun River at that time. The convention itself had so many articles, but among those, one was the creation of a clause that brought in Spanish and English commissioners to inspect the settlement which the Spanish claimed as their sovereign territory. As it would happen, both of these officials, Spanish and English, and would acquiesce to that article, and there would be many setbacks, especially because, as it has been brought out and the documents reveal, many of the Spanish military officers who were appointed there, people like Juan O'Sullivan, Rafael Llobet, Juan Bautista Gual. In fact, Llobet and Gual were part of the team, part of the troops that came along in that expedition to dislodge the English settlers and their enslaved persons from this area in September of 1798. So out of these, then, the convention included another article that prohibited any agricultural activity. But amendments in 1789 allowed for some subsistence farming. In fact, the Spanish even issued licenses to the English settlers. And there is evidence that persons who had been previously enslaved, who are now free, also got the possibility of acquiring a plantation ground and paying for the license along the banks of the New River, the Belize River, and the Sibun River. The extraction of timber from across the rivers that had been set as boundaries would create a problem, and so would fishing beyond the southern triangles. English commissioners such as James Bannatyne, John Garbot, Captain John Lawford, often agreed with the Spanish commissioners, and they also chastised the settlers. These infractions were not taken lightly, and a heavy fine would be charged, especially on mahogany logs that were cut across the boundary. Juan Bautista Gual, for example, explained that cuando se tolera y se disimula lo poco, los abusos a lo sumo. When you tolerate the little infractions, when you shy them away, you will find that total abuse can become the end product. And so it was things like these that would eventually lead the governor of Yucatan to consider dislodging the settlers from this area. A perusal of the Spanish records reveals several instances where the governor of Bacalar and slave owners in Belize demanded the return of runaways. In fact, there is evidence too that the Spanish officers, according to the English, enticed the slaves to run away to Bacalar. There's a letter that would later appear, one by Superintendent Bassett in 1802, in which he requested the return of deserters, army deserters, and slaves who had run away during the last war, in reference to 1798. And also requesting permissions for the settlers to come back to the plantations they had in that region of northern Belize. Obviously, people were living around those areas, and so there was different levels of social, familial, and commercial activity, both licit and illicit, across the boundaries. O'Neill was also aware of the military buildup in the English settlement. Reports from the governor of Bacalar remained information that the British West India Regiment had been sent into Belize following Spain's declaration of war against Britain in October of 1796. This was the opportunity that Arturo O'Neill y Tirón had been waiting for. Described by the Viceroy of Nueva España, Mexico at the time, Viceroy Branciforte, as poco sensato, of making little sense, O'Neill sought to capture the settlement and take advantage of the resources and to integrate the people, enslaved and free alike, into the Costa Oriental de la Península de Yucatan. And that expedition required his assistance from various other entities, particularly from Havana, Cuba. It took a while for O'Neill to set up this, but the records indicate that it did not come easy. And as they say, the rest is part of our story. I will now ask Dr. Cal to carry on.
Could I quickly interrupt and just ask our behind-the-scenes personnel, because this has been a venture that has had a lot of behind-the-scenes personnel working on it, to quickly provide a slight refreshment for our esteemed panelists. Being up here, it gets rather hot, and so we need to keep our panelists hydrated. So thank you very much, ladies, and then we move to Dr. Carl. I just want to remind the panelists to keep track of their time so that we get equal opportunity for everyone to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you. I'd like to start by underlining the point that what we're presenting this morning is preliminary. Dr. Bird has described the work done so far. We've transcribed from late 18th century manuscripts written in Spanish to modern Spanish. And the material has yet to be reviewed, the quality of the transcription, for example. The material has yet to be organized, and so on and so forth, before we proceed with the remaining work that Dr. Bird has mentioned is ahead of us in the next 2 years or so. The material that we've transcribed, however, is showing us that there is no new major finding unknown to us in Belize from British or other archival sources. There are differences, however, but the differences are in the details, in the planning itself, in the execution of the plan, in the invasion along New River, and particularly on the justification for the retreat or defeat, if we prefer to call it that, at St. George's Caye. Let us look at the mission. What is it that the Spaniards were looking for? Spanish Yucatan, not only the officials, but particularly the merchants, business people, saw in British occupation of Belize an opportunity lost for them. They saw with envy the logwood and mahogany business. They saw the trade, even if some of this trade was contraband. And they felt, why can't we be into that? After all, this area, this territory, is, legally speaking, Spanish. The Spaniards were also frustrated because privateers from many nations constantly attacked and robbed Spanish ships traveling from this region to Spain. And thirdly, and perhaps more importantly, Spanish Yucatan wanted not only legal sovereignty over Belize, but actual control of the territory. The planning. From the Spanish side, Captain General, the top man of the province of Yucatan, Arturo O'Neill Tirón, he personified this major chapter of Belize Mexican history. He was the man behind the planning, the man behind the execution, and the man behind the aftermath of the Battle of St. George's Caye. Even though war had not been declared, and it was around, I think Giovanni said October, the sources I saw said August, be that as it may, 1796. It was not until the 3rd of June, 1797, that O'Neill got royal approval to go ahead with this expedition to remove the British from Belize. Well, naturally, O'Neill had a big task ahead. And so he had to get the support of key people. People in the province of Yucatan itself, based in Merida, politicians, merchants, military officials, etc. He needed to get the full support of his boss, the viceroy, like the deputy king, the viceroy of New Spain, based in Mexico City. He had to get the support of key persons in Campeche and Bacalar for critical support to the marine and land components of the invasion. And as Giovanni pointed out, he had to get the support of a very technical person, the commander-in-chief of the Royal Spanish warships. So, how did he put all of this together? From the Royal Dockyard in Havana, O'Neill got approval for 5 ships and artillery and other materials. 2 frigates, 2 warships, the Minerva and the Nuestra Señora de la O, under the command of Sancho de Luna. O'Neill also got the royal schooner, the Felix, under the command of Francisco Fuentes Bocanegra. He also got 2 armed merchant vessels, the Santa Ana and the San Pedro, from Cuba. So altogether, 5 ships from Havana. From Campeche, O'Neill put together some 17 vessels, including 2 sloops, especially constructed for the invasion, armed private vessels, volunteered or chartered. Altogether, we're looking at 17 vessels from Campeche. And from Bacalar, O'Neill put together 9 armed vessels, 2 schooners, 2 sloops, 1 armed ponton, and 4 war canoes, 3 that had been captured from the British and 1 that was built specifically for the purpose. Altogether, we are looking at a convoy, at a fleet of 31 vessels, including transport vessels. I want to underline the point that this conflict is part of a bigger one that was waged among the colonial powers. In this particular case, we're looking at the Spaniards versus the English. And they were constantly fighting over their colonies. In 1798, this armada that we're talking about was prepared to drive out British woodcutters and their enslaved people from Belize, that at that time the Spaniards called Wallix. This invasion represented the last attempt on the part of the Spaniards to gain complete control over Belize, and more than likely to occupy Belize. The journeys to St. George's Caye, from Campeche to St. George's Caye. The convoy left on 20th of May, 1798, and reached Bacalar on the 15th of August. Notice the length of time that it took to reach Bacalar. This delay, because there were lots of delays, represented a big problem for the Spaniards in terms of provisions, in terms of water, in terms of information that they knew the English already had information about their movements. And in fact, the British did. Sancho de Luna, that I pointed out as being in command of the 2 40-cannon frigates, the Minerva and the Señora de la O. Sancho de Luna was to provide escort service to the convoy. But Sancho was not keen on this job. He didn't want to come. And he gave all kinds of reasons why he should not. And so in the end, these 2 frigates that had the most firepower did not participate. They went to Veracruz, and that was the end of their participation. Even though O'Neill had asked them, please help us blockade, at least if you can maneuver in the shallow waters of coastal Belize, at least in the deep sea, help us blockade so that reinforcements do not reach the British. But Sancho de Luna had other reasons why he would not do that, and in the end, he took off. The reefs, the shallows, and the currents close to the coast, all along the Yucatan coast, very dangerous. Charts that were available were almost not usable. Coastal pilots available could not guide the convoy. In fact, they had to put one of these coastal pilots in prison because he said they could pass, and in fact, they couldn't in some instances. 2 bongos got lost, one carried away by the currents, and fortunately for that one, it returned. The channel at Bercellon, we haven't been able to pinpoint precisely where. You can see that if even today we have difficulty pinpointing these on the map. What do you think of 1798 when there were far less charts available? In any case, of the fleet that left Campeche, 7 of the larger vessels could not get through. They could not get through the channel at Bercellon. And so artillery and other material had to be moved to smaller vessels to get 15 vessels through, along with about 2,800 troops and sailors. As I said, the convoy reached Rio Hondo on 15 August. Information and misinformation. The Spaniards relied very heavily on spies, quote unquote, and especially information gathered from prisoners and enslaved men who had run away from Belize. It appears from a first reading of the transcripted material that O'Neill did not have reasonably reliable information. The battle plan. The convoy left Bacalar on 24th August and reached Caye Chapel on 30th August. The plan called for the capture or destruction of St. George's Caye, all the marine defenses at St. George's Caye, and from that point as a base, they expected to attack the mainland and to overrun the British with an initial force of 1,300 troops and the remaining approximately 1,500 troops that were waiting in Bacalar. It is very likely that O'Neill expected to oversee the occupation of Belize. Even though the battle itself, the one we celebrate, did take place on the 10th of September 1798, there were several skirmishes between the 1st and the 9th of September. But the key point to note here is that the 24-vessel convoy, remember that about 7 could not cross, and so the convoy had been reduced to about 24 vessels, could not maneuver on the reefs. O'Neill tried going directly to the mainland through the Montego Caye shoals, but the defense put up by the British forced them to retreat. Couldn't get through. On the 6th of September, interestingly, the 7 larger vessels that could not get through initially finally managed to get through and reached the Spanish convoy. However, none of these could participate. None of them could participate in the battle because they were too big and they could not maneuver, they could not navigate through the channels between Long Caye and St. George's Caye. The battle itself. 10th of September, O'Neill, after going through Montego Shoals and failing, after trying to maneuver the channel so that he can attack St. George's Caye and retreating, on the 10th, he decided to push his way through the narrow channel and force the entire convoy towards the mainland, where he expected to land his troops. I should emphasize that for O'Neill, the landing of the troops was critical to his war plan. He needed to land those 1,300 troops to take over that is to defeat the forces, the British forces on the mainland that were prepared by then Superintendent Thomas Barrow and the 6th West India Regiment was at the mouth of the Belize River waiting for the Spaniards, along with the enslaved men who had been called upon to arms. According to their reckoning, the British were at key strategic positions between the entry and the exit of the channel between Long Caye and St. George's Caye. And so the British were prepared at very key strategic positions. The Merlin was there. There were 7 flat boats, 4 sloops, 1 schooner, and 2 smaller sailing boats. The Spaniards attacked with 3 sloops, 1 pontoon, 2 armed merchant vessels, 4 canoes, and 2 gunboats. At this critical point, on the 10th of September, Bocanegra, that was the commander of the convoy itself, refused to lead the charge. He claimed that since he was in charge of the convoy, he could not be spared to lead a particular charge. So he refused. And therefore, at the last hour, at the last minute, Pedro Grajales, not Gonzalez, Grajales, took over. So even there you can see some of the blunders, some of the problems that the Spaniards faced. From reports of their captains, it's very clear that the battle started around 3:30 p.m. According to the Spaniards, British artillery was much more superior, and particularly the gun flats manned by blacks that had positioned themselves both in front and behind their vessels, seeking to trap them in the channel. Actually, a Spanish pontoon got stuck and had to be pulled out. At this point, Grajales felt that he could not deal with this kind of defensive and very strategic onslaught on the part of the British, and particularly the gun flats manned by the enslaved folks. Then Grajales got word that another British schooner and more sloops, and I think this was Thomas Barrow, that had gotten word from Captain Moss that the big battle was on. And so when Grajales got word that another British schooner and more sloops were on their way from the mainland, he decided, no, this is not going to work for us. And he gave the signal to retreat, and they went back to Caye Chapel. Why did the Armada fail? Why did they fail? One, we've mentioned Sancho de Luna, and that refusal on the part of Sancho was devastating to O'Neill. Not because they would have participated. I don't think they could have. Their ships were too big. But at the very least, morale was bad after that because they didn't have two of their key ships that at least could have helped in blockading reinforcements being sent to Belize. The long delay to move the convoy from Campeche to St. George's Caye did give the British more time to prepare for the offensive. There were so many logistical issues associated with this delay in terms of provisions, in terms of water, and yellow fever that was hitting the Spaniards at this time. The reefs, the shoals, the currents, especially between Long Caye and St. George's Caye, rendered Spanish vessels largely ineffectual. They were at the mercy of British war vessels, including gunflats, manned by the enslaved men. These were in strategic positions and led by the experienced Captain Moss. O'Neill and Grajales were ineffective war strategists. Another critical point is that the Spaniards did not have a plan B for the use of their nearly 3,000 troops that they had brought and amassed at Bacalar, 1,300 that they had taken to Quichapo, and the approximately 1,500 that they had left in Bacalar. They had no clear plan B. Their thought was that they would land them via ships onto the mainland, and from there they would do their work. The destruction of the small banana and sugarcane plantations and the 240 quote-unquote houses, they weren't really houses. They counted anything that was on 4 sticks as a house, which was carried out very late, way into October. This didn't seem to have played much of a role at all. Except for the Spaniards' reference to 3 whites killed and 4 drowned from the British sloop Sapit, both sides claimed no casualties of their own. O'Neill even hinted at coming back on another day with more marine resources. To conclude, emphasizing once again that what we are presenting on behalf of the team is preliminary. We have yet to reorganize the material. We are yet to translate the material into English. We have yet to analyze, interpret, and eventually publish. The differences we have found are in the details, but the material is basically confirming what we already know, that the Spaniards were determined to remove the British from Belize and to take over from them, to occupy Belize. The Battle of St. George's Caye was the last attempt on the part of Spain to dislodge the British from Belize. Their failure had to do with many reasons, but we wish to underline, because the documents are pointing to the spirited defense of the Baymen with their enslaved men, who prevented the convoy from landing its troops. Had those troops been landed, it could have been a far different outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cal. We will now have Dr. Ramos from the Universidad de Quintana Roo do a presentation on some of the key points that we explored. The questions are up on the screen. And I guess some of them you will have perhaps had as inquiries of your own. So let's proceed with Dr. Ramos doing his presentation. I believe English, Spanish? Spanish. Okay, Dr. Ramos will do it in Spanish today. He speaks English, you know, but I guess he feels that it would be best to present it in Spanish. And I'll do some translating.
Buenos días a todos.
Okay, I guess.
Ahora sí está mejor. Bueno, creo. Bueno, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Muchísimas gracias al doctor Ángel Cal por haber diseñado este proyecto binacional en el que nos ha invitado a participar a las universidades vecinas de aquí de la frontera México-Belice.
Dr. Ramos is thanking Dr. Cal and the team who have put together this presentation in conjunction with the universities in the region.
Mi área de especialidad es lengua y literatura española.
Dr. Ramos specializes in language and literature in the Spanish language.
Por eso para mí es un honor y un placer revisar documentos españoles del siglo XVIII.
He finds pleasure in revising, reviewing, and reading through 18th century Spanish documents.
El doctor Cal y su equipo nos ha dado la oportunidad de revisar la historia de una batalla.
And in working with Dr. Cal has given them an opportunity to review the incidences from the Spanish records regarding the Battle of St. George's Caye of 1798.
No puedo agregar mucho a la excelente y resumida exposición que ya hizo el doctor Cal.
Dr. Cal's excellent summary is so succinct that he will see how he can add to that information.
También el contexto que ha dado el doctor Beer y el profesor Giovanni han sido excelentes.
He's also happy with the introductions that Dr. Bird and myself have given out.
Y como lector, únicamente me he fijado en los detalles que contienen estas más de 1000 fojas escritas en español a finales del siglo XVIII.
Dr. Ramos has perused these over 1,200 pages of the Spanish documents.
Así que lo que nos asombra como lectores contemporáneos de un hecho sucedido a finales del siglo XVIII es la cantidad de detalles, como ya bien lo ha explicado el doctor Cal.
And as a researcher, you become fascinated with the amount of details that such records reveal.
Leyendo los detalles, uno se puede dar idea de la dimensión que tuvo la planeación de esta batalla.
Reading through the documents, you can see the detailed work that went into the planning of such an expedition.
Y por supuesto, hay muchos temas que contemporáneamente podemos trabajar, tanto historiadores de Belice como historiadores de México.
And this provides an opportunity for researchers and historians from Belize and Mexico to look into the incidences.
Con la lectura de estos documentos, con la transcripción de estos documentos, nosotros podemos ver vida cotidiana de la época, historia de las mentalidades, historia de la guerra en la época.
Reading through these documents and doing further analysis, you can see what was the lifestyle, what were the events, what were the people involved with at that period.
Y algo que nos ha dado mucho dolor de cabeza, la historia cartográfica.
And what has also given us a headache is the cartography, the history of the cartography of the area.
Así que en los detalles está el demonio.
As they say, in the details, you can find the devil, or the devil is in the details.
Eso dirían las escrituras clásicas, pero en la historia diríamos que en los detalles está la historia.
The devil is in the details is for the literary classics, but in history, the details are in the devil.
El trabajo de revaloración histórica desde el siglo XXI incluye, por supuesto, la revisión de estos detalles y la reconsideración de estos detalles.
A revaluation of the 18th century records in the 21st century requires that we do look into it more scrupulously.
Justamente esto es lo que le da la dimensión humanística al estudio de la historia.
And in so doing, the humanistic aspect of the study of history becomes more relevant.
Y por supuesto también es una excelente oportunidad para cooperar historiadores mexicanos e historiadores beliceños en un gran proyecto.
And of course, it provides again the opportunity for Belizean and Mexican researchers, historians, and other people in the field of academia to understand the history of the region.
Quisiera agradecer al doctor Bird su hospitalidad en todas las ocasiones que hemos venido durante los meses anteriores.
Again, he thanks Dr. Bird for being a very good host for the many times that they have had to come to work along with us in Belize.
Lo mismo al profesor Giovanni Pinello, que siempre nos ha atendido.
And for the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, who have taken the time to host them.
Y por supuesto, hoy agradecemos a la Asociación de Historia de Belice, que nos recibe aquí.
Our gratitude to the Belize History Association for giving us this opportunity.
Es importante decir que las historias nacionales suelen basarse en la historia diplomática o en la historia militar.
Often the history of a community is based on its diplomatic history, on its military history.
Y a veces basarse en la historia diplomática o en la historia militar como única fuente para hacer las historias nacionales es llevarnos a historias parciales, a historias sesgadas.
And looking at history from that point of diplomatic military sources can often lead us into what may be biased views or what may be partial views.
La oportunidad que nos da el doctor Cal con su proyecto, con el proyecto que él diseñó, con el proyecto al que él nos invitó, es
the opportunity provided through this paleographic project, which Dr. Cal heads,
es tener una visión más amplia de nuestras historias nacionales.
provides us with a wider view of our national histories.
Es un camino para entender cómo se han poblado nuestras regiones.
It provides a means to understand how our regions have become populated.
Y por supuesto es un camino para que nuestros estudiantes universitarios, tanto de Belice como de México, hagan tesis.
And it provides an opportunity for Belizean and Mexican students to work on theses.
Nos es muy grato para nosotros establecer esta colaboración internacional en algo tan concreto como la paleografía de los documentos españoles del siglo XVIII.
And this paleographic project is really gratifying to establish and make those connections internationally.
Es todo lo que tengo que decir. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Gracias, Dr. Ramos. We'll continue with Maestro Eduardo Montalvo from Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo, which is in the city of José María Morelos, about 3 hours away from Chetumal.
Sí, bueno. Well, the experts have spoken already. They gave us a lot of details about this battle. And it's very interesting that in our side, in Mexico, we don't know a lot about history of Belize. I studied at Ucro. I studied just crossing the border. I studied in my hometown, which is Carrillo Puerto. And now I'm working in a different town in José María Morelos, in the same state. But we never We never heard anything about the history of Belize. And it's been a pleasure for me, for us, it's been a pleasure to read about these very important events for, especially for Belize people. I feel very happy because even when I joined this group, I didn't know what to expect. And now that I'm reading, it's like a movie I'm watching. I'm trying to imagine what's happening in the battle, who's fighting, about the big boats and everything, all those details, as they said. It's very interesting, and it's very, I feel willing to continue doing this. And even if it was in Spanish, Spanish was different, you know, language evolves, language changes. And that's also a very good part of this, because we are, as Dr. Martin said, we are reading about the life of the people on that time. We're reading about customs. We are reading about economic things. We're reading about relation between countries and, of course, disputes as well. There is not much I can say about the details, because Dr. Caye has already said many things. But what I can say about these questions is that probably some of the causes why Spanish people lost this battle was because of the information, or the lack of information they had about this, specifically about the area, because there were some areas where boats couldn't pass. They got stuck there, and then they were attacked easily and obviously defeated. They had to retreat. Even if the source of information was British, sometimes even Spanish people, they were, for me, they were given information that was inaccurate. It was false. They were saying, oh, okay, you Spanish people, you're more, you have better boats, better vessels, but the reality shows that it was different. There were more people and better prepared. Last night we were coming to Belize City, and we were talking about this, and we were trying to figure out where this house that was mentioned here, full of guns, full of weapons, where it was located. It is amazing. It catches you. Also, I have to say that all the details have been said already by Dr. Caye. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to participate in a project like this. I think we need to collaborate more, because we share a lot of things, not only boundaries, but we share heritage, we share culture, and we share many things. Thank you.
Thanks for the warm applause. Could we give them one last applause to all the panelists? I know we would want to go on further, but in the interest of time, we want to open up the floors to questions from the audience to the panelists. So if you have questions, I think there's going to be a mic passed around. I know there is one more speaker, and I'm sorry, but of time, we're trying to get the questions in for our radio listeners. And for all of, if you have time for the people who are listening, I'm sure the final speaker would make his presentation at the Jaguar Auditorium this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. So questions, because I'm sure some of you will leave shortly, so there's a mic here.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm very curious to know if your research has disclosed perhaps how many enslaved or free blacks participated. Very much, I would like to know that.
You want to take that?
Panelists?
We have not at this time been able to come up with an exact number. We do know that prior to, after the declaration of war, which was in August, and it took 3 months notice before war actually erupted, that the members of the British West India Regiment who were stationed at Newtown Barracks in Belize City, in what is now Belize City, there was an exchange of these troops that had to go back to Jamaica. The settlers at the time saw it as leaving an opportunity for continued Spanish threats. There was, these records do not necessarily reveal this, but looking at other records, because we're trying to verify the information, it shows that the majority of the enslaved population were out in the forests cutting logwood and mahogany. In fact, the month of September is part of the rainy season. And so what would they be doing here? The slave owners also saw that having the enslaved persons being in the drill, in the military drill, in serving in fatigues at the time, was detrimental to their own business. And so the numbers are not quite clear from the Spanish records at this time. But there were a number of them, particularly within Belize Town, who were offered payment and other inducements, freedom as such, to become part of to go into military service, the long and short of it.
Any more questions? We're running short of time. There are some hands up.
Dr. Kal, from what you have seen so far of the research, has there been any connection whatsoever between the province of Verapaz and what was happening in the Yucatan? To this point, is there any connection that you can find in the research? Thank you.
Specifically with Verapaz, no, I haven't seen it yet. Maybe there is, and we haven't come across it. But there is an interesting proposal from Spanish officials in Guatemala that O'Neill and the Guatemalans, well, we say Guatemalans, at that time that wasn't a concept yet, but the Spaniards in what today is Guatemala would join in dislodging the British from Belize. There was just a proposal. Apparently it did not fly because it was mentioned, it was sent to the Viceroy in Mexico City, but nothing apparently came out of it.
We now proceed to, the gentleman with the mic, that will be our last question in the interest of time. If you have any other questions, you can post it on the Belize History Association website or the ISCR website, and we will get back to you with those answers. So go ahead.
Right. A pleasant good morning. The issue of whether or not there was a Battle of St. George's Caye, whether it was myth or reality, has been bedeviling for many people in Belize over a long period of time. And I think that congratulations would be in order for me to say that the panel has done an excellent job in terms of providing information that I think answers many questions. From an academic standpoint, and I thought I would phrase this one perhaps for Dr. Bird and perhaps Dr. Carl and perhaps the other side of the panel from Mexico, it seems to me that much of the efforts that has gone into whether or not this is fact or fiction relates to research being done in Britain. As people talk about this, they would say, well, they've gone to the archives in Great Britain to see what information might exist. And it would seem to me that one of the logical paths should have been to actually go to where we are, where we go to our Spanish counterparts in Mexico and probably Spain. And really my question is whether or not, in your experience, any initiative of this sort has ever been attempted before, where from our standpoint, from the Belize standpoint, we have explored perhaps what the records on the Spanish side is saying. Thank you.
Can I start? Let me start answering or responding, perhaps. What we worked with is a set of records that Juan Luis Bonor had photocopied at the archives in Seville, Spain. So these sources are entirely of Spanish origin. When we analyzed what would we do, what would be our work plan to address the whole question of what are the Spaniards saying about this conflict, we were very clear that the set of manuscripts, the 1,200 pages that we had in our hands, would only be a start. More than likely, there are more records in Seville. There are more records elsewhere, as you rightly said, Mexico City, probably Yucatan archives itself, and other parts of the then Spanish Empire. So historians would address not just the diplomatic and the military, as Dr. Ramos pointed out, and as well as Eduardo, not just the diplomatic and the military as important and as of keen interest that these are to us, but there are many other aspects of life. There are many, many other aspects of the relationship between not necessarily the colonial powers in Britain and in Spain, but the people on the ground, the enslaved people that ran away to Bacalar, and this seemed to have been a constant. The trade that was going on between, and a lot of it was smuggling, between Belize and southern Yucatan. So this, in a sense, is only the beginning of a work where Belizean historians and other historians have started to collaborate with our Mexican colleagues to say, how can we better understand the history? Let us go back to the sources again. Let us find out for ourselves so that we can analyze this material, we can evaluate the material, and we can publish it for the good of both countries. But in so doing, I'm reminded of what Dr. Caye said about the Belize History Association. We have a very important obligation to train the next generation of Belize historians. And we will not do that only with giving them second-hand information that we have analyzed. They have to become a part of that process. They have to be trained at the bachelor's and at the master's and later on the PhD levels so that we can have a fuller picture and a fuller appreciation and greatly value the history of this region.
Please give them a round of applause. It's been a very informative morning. I'm sure we would want to go more, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask a friend and colleague, Mr. John Dunn, to come up. He's from the Belize History Association, the executive of the Belize History Association, to give us the vote of thanks.
All right, good morning, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to thank National Celebrations Committee, the chair, Honorable Elodio Aragon, Minister of State, with the responsibility of culture, youth, sports, in the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, and Culture. I'd also like to thank the Belize History Association, of course, Dr. Caye, our chair, fellow members of the executive. I would like to thank NICH, especially Mr. Gregory Vernon, the acting president of NICH, also Ms. Diane Haylock, the previous president of NICH, who helped to put this together. I would like to thank Ms. Karen Vernon, acting director of the Institute of Creative Arts, along with her staff. Special thanks, Ms. Gillian Fuller. Also, Mr. Nigel Incalada from ISCR. He's the director of ISCR. His staff, which assisted with logistics and helped put this event together. Members of the Diplomatic Corps. Mr. Diego Supran, the director of the Cultural Institute of Mexico. We'd like to turn to our panelists and thank them. Dr. Cal from the University of Belize, Dr. Bird from Archives, Mr. Pinello from ISCR, Dr. Martin Ramos from the Institute, from Universidad de Quintana Roo, Dr. Juan Castillo, who we didn't get to hear from, but he'll speak this afternoon in Belmopan, also from Universidad de Quintana Roo, Maestro Eduardo Montalvo Pool from the Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. Also, the students that worked along with them on this research, we'd like to thank them. It's too many to list. The audience, special guests, students from the various schools, we'd like to thank you for being here. It was our pleasure. Members of the general public, our radio audience, of course, the prayers from Reverend Linda Mogale. Thank you very much, Reverend. We'd like to thank our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Gian Vasquez, also. Thank you. Gracias también. All right. Thank you, everybody.